perhaps the most misunderstood and misrepresented image in Jordan Peterson's best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life, is the image of the male lobster fighting for dominance in a hierarchy we all ignore, way down at the depths at the bottom of the ocean. It's an image with real pathos. It's an image that elicits pity. It's an image that in some ways shows the tragic futility of struggles to be someone, to be an important person, to be on the top of the heap, struggling away in the obscurity, 10,000 leagues under the sea, to be the lobster that gets to push other lobsters around. I think this image has been remembered in public consciousness and in political discourse as if it were a justification for social inequality, as if it were a rationalization of, as if it were an argument offered in support of the type of extreme inequality seen today in some capitalist dystopias, let's put it that way. That's neither the psychological, nor philosophical, nor political function of this image in the book. I was really surprised to find, on finally reading the primary source text, that his point is ultimately to offer a justification for why he and his daughter depend on SSRI, antidepressant drugs. The most bizarre plot twist comes up after we have a few pages discussing how dejected and depressed the lobsters become, who are, in his words, lobster losers, lobsters who are not in the fortunate minority. And then he takes several leaps of intuition on the basis of the reported studies about the significance of serotonin in lobsters' brains. Now, there are many, many different ways in which this is kind of misleading and even factually wrong. It's very strange to me that Jordan Peterson has managed to live through the debunking of antidepressant medication, the widespread, well-researched, extensively published controversy that turned all of the assumptions of biopsychiatry inside out and upside down within our lifetime. It's very strange to me that he's lived through the proliferation of human addiction to psychiatric medication, abuse of prescription drugs becoming of ever more epidemic proportions, that he's lived through this and he never developed more of a critical perspective on the use of antidepressants. But what he's doing here, in the truest sense of the word pathetic, it's the pathos of a man who wants to go back to the drawing board and reinterpret evolution, reinterpret the nature of nature, in order to offer a justification for his own drug habit, long after the pseudoscientific rationale for that drug habit has been debunked. And it's been debunked within his own profession, within his own area of research, within his remit of academic expertise. I wouldn't feel that I was being fair to Jordan Peterson if I came here and I really harshly interrogated what he says about Taoism. I obviously know much more about Taoist philosophy, Taoist religion, than Jordan Peterson knows or ever will know. I would feel dishonest if I were raking him over the coals and cross-examining him for what he says about Buddhism. Jordan Peterson has no expertise in Buddhism. To some extent, this is to be excused or, shrugged off with a laugh. These things are far, far removed from his supposed area of expertise. But the matter of SSRI antidepressant drugs, their importance in our culture and society, and even their importance for him and his family on the microcosm level, that should be right in his strike zone. He should be able to really knock it out of the park. And instead, what we see is a man who has really been demented by kind of self-centered self-justification, a man clinging for meaning, who goes so far as to say that the lobsters who are losers in the hierarchy, that they want to feel like winners, and that the only way they can do this, much like humans in our society, is by recovering their serotonin. Now, there are many different ways in which the monoamine hypothesis, the assumptions about serotonin levels, have been debunked and refuted. One of the most fundamental is that the assumption that low serotonin levels correspond to depression, either the feeling of depression or depressive behaviors, that has been debunked. They're not correlated or linked at all, which was proven with horrible laboratory studies, as you can imagine. That association was false and originated in marketing claims. It never originated in falsifiable scientific data. Now, furthermore, I've pointed this out in many videos, there's a real smoking gun piece of evidence in that we have SSRI drugs, and then we have drugs with the exact opposite effect called SSRE drugs. And the effects that these drugs have on depression are identical. So, if you have drugs that raise people's blood pressure and you have drugs that lower people's blood pressure, but they both have the same effect on depression, that's proof that blood pressure medication doesn't treat depression, or that blood pressure is not linked to depression in this way. There's not this kind of relationship. So this has been debunked from many different angles. I have many different videos on this channel in which I'm just quoting and relaying to you information from experts who devoted decades of their lives not just to doing the research, but to getting out in the public sphere and propounding it to overcome, frankly, the marketing hype. But let's just step back and ask hypothetically, what if Jordan Peterson were right? What if the philosophy he was presenting here were based on factually true assumptions? Wouldn't that be the most pathetic philosophy of all? What he's arguing is that he and his daughter are born losers. And he said this in many ways. Those of you who've heard him talk, especially the interviews, he's done interviews with his daughter sitting next to him, that they were born with disabilities, that they were born with disadvantages. And the only way he can be happy is by chemically inducing the illusion that he's a winner by taking serotonin reuptake inhibitors, by taking this class of drugs. What an absolutely terrible, bleak vision of the universe. The vision of the universe that from day one, there have always been a small number of lobsters who claw their way to the top of the pile, top of the social hierarchy, and that nobody else can really be happy. And that he identifies himself with those losers, with the lobsters at the bottom of the pile, who are shamed and humiliated and have their confidence broken. Again, to what extent he's misrepresenting the science about lobsters, I don't know. I know the science about human beings and serotonin. But he goes so far as to say that the lobsters who lose have to dissolve their brains and grow a new brain to take on a new attitude and a new place in their society. Doesn't sound like science, but maybe there's some grain of truth there that he's poetically exaggerating or what have you. There are drugs that can help you cope with unhappiness, sorrow in your life, short term, on a shallow basis. One of the most effective, is nicotine. And if you really read the scientific literature about what are the effects of nicotine, you'll realize that it's one of the most powerful and underappreciated antidepressants. It's one that people have relied on for, centuries. And of course, the main reason we don't glorify it as an antidepressant is that it's bad. It's bad in many different ways, not just because it gives you cancer. For one thing, it cultivates emotional dependence on the drug. But, I've read real scientific literature on this. One of the reasons why nicotine is so addictive is that when you're low, it raises you up just a little bit. It helps you focus. It helps you actually raise your stress levels when you're feeling despondent. So when you're really low, really depressed, actually stress is in a sense positive. You take on focus and have a sense of objective. You gain stress in a positive sense coming from a low ebb. But when you're too stressed out, when you feel nervous, when you feel anxiety, when stress is overwhelming, then it brings the stress levels down. So nicotine addiction helps to keep you in this narrow band. And many people who are long-term smokers, long-term smoking addicts, this is consistent with what they report subjectively, that when they first wake up in the morning, they need a cigarette. When they're really sad, when they're really dejected, they need a cigarette. But then on the other hand, when they're stressed out with a problem, when they need to calm down, they also need a cigarette. They feel this intuitively, and apparently there's hard science to back up this element of the science of addiction as it applies to cigarettes. If what Peterson was saying were true about antidepressants, if what he was saying were true about evolution and inequality, and even just his place in it, his place and his daughter's place, it would seem to me that the inevitable conclusion of the stirring opening chapter of this now influential book, this book that I can't really regard as anything more than the aimless mutterings of a madman. The conclusion would have to be that we live in a world of unfair competition. And the way to cope with that unfairness is to become a drug addict, just like him.